Good morning. The October 15th, 2025 meeting of the Board of Estimates is now called to order. The board continues to meet in a hybrid format. For those here in person, please take a moment to silence your cell phones and other electronic devices. For those attending virtually, if you desire an opportunity to speak, we ask that you please keep yourself on mute until the chair recognizes you. When you are called upon, please announce your name and organization and speak loudly and clearly as you present. At this time, I would ask our clerk, Celeste Amato, for any corrections, additions, and noted abstentions for today's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, everyone.
Morning.
This morning, we have the following corrections to note for SB 25113329, Mayor's Office of Homeless Services. In background explanation, we are deleting the entire first paragraph and inserting the purpose of this agreement is for the Provider Time Organization, Inc. to operate a family emergency shelter serving individuals or families experiencing homelessness in the city of Baltimore. The provider will offer services through their family emergency shelter program, in parens, the project. SB 25130504, Mayor's Office of Employment Development. In background explanation, in the first paragraph, please delete July 1, 2025, and insert July 1, 2024. We have no walk-ons to note this morning. We have one deferral this morning, SB 2513644, Bureau of Procurement Award Recommendation, RFP Solicitation Number RFQ 000724, Internet Service Provider for HABC locations for $988,080. This is deferred until November 5th at the request of the Comptroller. We have one withdrawal this morning, SB 2513634, for the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement. This is a travel request, which is being withdrawn at the request of the agency. We have one statement to note this morning, SB 2514435, for the Department of Real Estate Agreement of Sale, Scarlett Covering Incorporated, for $1,000. A statement of support was received from the Wilson Park Northern Neighborhood Association. The following items are on the non-routine agenda this morning, SB 2513719. This is for BBMR fiscal 2025 year-end supplemental appropriation and transfer request for $112,974,144. SB 2513588 for the Baltimore City Fire Department, an unauthorized procurement for Coven Collective LLC for advertising services in the amount of $200,390. SB 2513810 for the mayoralty nonprofit assessment agreements with totaling $48 million. SB 2513625 MR Educational Grants Financial Plan Baltimore City Children and Youth Fund for fiscal year 26. And SB 2513539 Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs, a consultant agreement with R.E. Harris Consulting LLC for $225,000. This morning, we have the following abstentions to note for the record. City Administrator Faith Leach has no abstentions. The Honorable President Zeke Cohen is abstaining on SB 2513719, Bureau of Budget and Management Research Transfer Funds, Transfer and Allocation of Funds. The Honorable Comptroller Bill Henry is abstaining on all travel requests and reimbursements. City Solicitor Ebony Thompson has no abstentions to note this morning. Deputy City Solicitor Stephen Salisbury has no abstentions to note this morning. And Director of Public Works Matthew Garbark has no abstentions to note this morning. We also have no votes to record on the routine agenda, Mr. President. Thank you. That concludes our opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. At this time, I ask for a motion to approve and adopt the opening statement as read by the clerk.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of adopting the opening statement, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The opening statement is adopted. And now direct the board members' attention to the memorandum from my office dated October 15th, 2025, identifying matters to be considered as routine agenda items together with any corrections, additions, abstentions, and no votes that have been noted by the clerk. I'll entertain a motion to approve all the items contained on the routine agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor of approving the items on the routine agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The routine agenda items have been adopted. Seeing no further questions, we will now move on to the non-routine agenda. The first item on the non-routine agenda is under SB 2513719, a request from the Budget Office to approve a transfer and allocation of funds, more commonly discussed as the year-end supplemental appropriations for the FY 2025 budget. On behalf of BBMR, we have Director Laura Larson. Director Larson, the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Council President, Mr. Comptroller, Madam City Administrator, members of the Honorable Board. I'm Laura Larson. I'm the city's Budget Director here today to present to you for your consideration the supplemental actions to close out fiscal 25, the fiscal year that ended on June 30th. To start us off, just a quick summary in terms of the overall year-end position for the city based off of our preliminary unaudited work to date. The general fund ended the year with a $66.6 million overall surplus. That is $29.6 million higher than what we were projecting in our third quarter projections. The strength on the revenue, on our general fund revenue, is coming from income tax, where we had anticipated, based off of direction from the state of Maryland, a drop-off in income tax receipts in the third and fourth quarter. That did not materialize, and we actually saw an overall increase in income tax revenue throughout fiscal 25, along with a very large year-end unallocated distribution from the state. The other piece of strength within the city's general fund is coming from our property tax, which represents almost 50% of our revenue. In fiscal 25, we saw that the overall collection rate of the real property tax had beat our budget projections ever so slightly, but helped to contribute to an overall surplus. On the expenditure side, we are anticipating a $53.5 million net, this says surplus, it should say net deficit. The expenditures that we saw in the third quarter slowed compared to, the year-end expenditures slowed compared to our third quarter projections, thanks in part to the budget controls that were put in place coming out of our third quarter review. To note, a couple of items that are contributing to this deficit include contracts with our police and fire unions that were finalized after the fiscal 25 budget was adopted, and both contracts ultimately exceeded the assumptions that we had included in the budget. A point of good news is that the city continues to see progress in terms of filling our vacant positions. In fiscal 25, we saw an overall decline of 16% in our vacancies in the general fund, and that includes both sworn and unsworn positions. These numbers work together to result in a net ending surplus in the general fund of $13.1 million. I do just want to stress these numbers are based off of our preliminary actions to close out the city's general fund. My colleagues in the Bureau of Accounting and Payroll Services continue to work through the closeout process and the generation of the city's annual comprehensive financial report, and these numbers may vary slightly as they continue and finalize their work. So before you today is a request to appropriate $112.9 million for general fund agencies that ended fiscal 25 with a deficit. This supplemental will be funded through surplus revenue that was realized, as well as surpluses from various other general fund agencies. The agencies where we are requesting a supplemental include the fire department that ended the year with a $38.5 million deficit. That included costs from the union contract, as well as overtime and the use of contractual EMS services. For the law department, we're requesting an $81,000 supplemental, and that will help to fund unbudgeted contractual services that were utilized in fiscal 25. The Liquor License Board, we're requesting $454,000. This will help to cover office rental costs, the costs associated with leasing external cars, and then overtime expenses that were incurred in fiscal 25. For city schools, we're requesting $12.9 million, and this will help to fund a contribution that was made to the City Springs redevelopment that's part of the Perkins Somerset Old Town project. For the police department, we're seeking $47.5 million, which will help to fund cost overruns associated with the union contract as well as overtime. In the Department of Recreation and Parks, we're seeking $5.6 million, which would help to resolve a deficit in terms of overtime spending, urban forestry costs, as well as park maintenance costs. For the Sheriff's Department, we're seeking $3.4 million that will help to cover fleet costs, the use of leasing outside vehicles, and overtime costs in the department. And then finally, in the Department of Transportation, we're seeking $4.5 million to help fund overages related to last winter's snow removal costs. I do want to take a moment and just lean in on some of the budgetary controls that we have put in place for fiscal '26 to limit agency deficits and overages. The first is in the space of purchasing controls. And so since July 1st, we have moved back to our pre-workday posture in terms of the review of agency purchasing activity. So there is, we've reduced the threshold dramatically, and so almost all purchasing activity that is initiated by agencies is coming through my office to be vetted and reviewed for budget checks prior to moving on to procurement to initiate the activity. As part of this process, we are requiring agencies to prepare internal budget amendments that we can handle administratively in order to fund any unplanned purchasing activity. In terms of hiring actions, we're continuing with our current practices where agencies must provide recurring offsets for any unplanned HR action. And we are required, in the fiscal '26 budget process, we required that agencies identify spending plans for any reclassifications or new position creations that they would be planning to initiate during fiscal '26. I will note that the first quarter of fiscal '26 ended on September 30th, so my team continues to work closely with our agency partners to finalize our first quarter review, and we are aiming to have that work done in the next couple of weeks. With that, I can take any questions regarding these items.
I'm going to start with Comptroller Henry, and then I got some of my own.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. If you could go back to the $4.5 million to transportation for snow removal, I'm sorry I missed, was that covering an overspend from last year or putting more money in for next year?
This is resolving an overspend from FY25.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
And we're working with the Department of Transportation to examine the snow budget as part of the fiscal '27 budget. One thing that's important to remember with the snow budget is that DOT houses the budget for the entire city. And so if there are other city agencies that are contributing and partnering as part of our snow removal efforts, that also is getting charged to the DOT snow budget. One of the things that that I've observed in my time here with you with this role is that I believe that we're underfunding that in relation to the current cost of the contracts, salt costs, contractual costs, all those things have grown at a faster pace than what we've assumed in the budget. So we're working with Director Macbeth and her team to recalibrate that for fiscal '27.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Larson. Starting on a really positive note, really glad to hear about the reduction in vacancies. To what do you attribute that good news?
I think that we are seeing agencies really focus in on their vacancies across the board in terms of trying to deploy new strategies in terms of bringing folks into our workforce. I would say too, police, the progress that we have seen in the police and fire departments could be attributed to creative tactics that both of those departments are deploying in terms of making sure that they have a broad reach to potential candidates and maybe beyond the traditional candidates that were previously applying for those jobs. No, undoubtedly, we've been helped out with the situation at the federal government level. During this period is also during the period where we were seeing a number of federal government workers be displaced. And I know that there have been many agencies that have been able to bring on new talent that otherwise perhaps wouldn't be looking at city jobs.
That's great to hear, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate the recruitment efforts of some of our agencies, and just to remind folks, it is always better to work in Baltimore than to work in DC. So glad to hear that that's been happening. I want to ask about, I think there were 5 agency overspends within the mayor's office, and I do not see those in this supplemental. Can you explain what those were and why it's not covered in this supplemental?
So the supplementals that we're bringing before the board today help us to meet our charter requirement to ensure that agencies are ending the year, do not end the year over budget. In terms of how the mayoralty is treated, the mayoralty and then every agency that's listed as mayoralty related is presented as an overall, as one single agency. And so while we did have individual mayoralty related offices that did exceed their budgets, the mayoralty in total was within their appropriation for fiscal 25, which is why, with the exception of city schools, you do not see those broken out as part of this action. I can note the agencies, the mayoralty related agencies that trended over. We had the Office of the Labor Commissioner had a deficit of $1.7 million. That was related to legal fees that exceeded the budget associated with the city's ongoing work to negotiate contracts with our union partners. The art and culture grants, which includes grants to our various cultural institutions as well as the allocation to BOPA, had a deficit of $480,000. That was related to benefit costs that are funded for the Baltimore Museum of Art and the Walters Art Gallery. The convention complex had a deficit of $5.1 million. The convention complex includes not only the convention center, but also the CFG Arena. And under the terms of the agreement with the operator of the CFG Arena, they are entitled to a portion of the revenue that the city generates through the admissions and amusement tax, specifically for events that are held at their facility. And so we needed to make a contribution to that facility in fiscal 26 or fiscal 25 that was unbudgeted, but we did have the revenue for that. Cable and
Could you just a little more texture on that one?
yeah, so when the new agreement was negotiated with the operator of the CFG Arena, we changed the revenue structure in terms of how revenue sharing was set up for that facility. And so under the terms of the new contract, the operator of the CFG Arena is entitled to receive a portion of their admission and amusement tax over a certain baseline. So once we have received the baseline funding, the CFG Arena operator gets all of the additional admission and amusement tax above that level. Fiscal 24 was the first full fiscal year that we were operating under the terms of the new agreement, and this revenue sharing interaction was not properly budgeted on the expenditure side.
Got it. Okay, and is that for specific outlays? Is that for like security and for other things, or is it just that was the revenue sharing?
It's a revenue sharing agreement, and that revenue goes back to the CFG, the operator of the CFG Arena, to support operating costs at the facility, and to support investments back into the facility as well.
Understood. Okay, please proceed.
The Mayor's Office of Cable and Communication had a $227,000 deficit due to staffing costs, and the Mayor's Office of Employment Development had a $167,000 deficit due to costs associated with the Youth Works program in 2024.
Understood. I appreciate that. In the same way that we're going to be concerned about any agency overspend, how is BBMR holding those particular entities accountable? It sounds certainly like a lot of it is not huge overspends, but anything, anytime an agency exceeds a budget, that's cause for concern. How are you working with them to make sure everything is in balance?
So I will say, in the case of the labor commissioner, the art and culture grants, and the convention complex, all of those items were where we had underestimated those costs as part of the budget forecast for fiscal '25. And my team has been working with those agencies and looking at those exact costs to make sure that we have them, that we're projecting those properly as part of the budget build.
Underestimated because of inflation, because of just shifts in market? Like, how do you all, where do the projections go with that?
So our projections for a number of these things come in consultation with the agency. And so
Sure.
I would say in the case of, for example, the Labor Commissioner's Office, the myths on the legal fees, we, as part of for fiscal '26, we had to negotiate with all of the city unions, which is abnormal. And so in the case of the Labor Commissioner's Office, we had underestimated the amount of hours that would be needed to support the volume of work that was needed to happen in fiscal '25. We also had some costs from the prior year contracts that also came in the first half of the year before we even started negotiating for fiscal '26. So that was one where we just underestimated the costs for the volume of workload that was associated. In the case of the art and culture grants with the benefit costs at those two institutions, we work with those institutions to try to project the costs associated with their rosters and their personnel, and they were just understated for fiscal '25. In the case
Is
of
that because of, like, we're shifting with BOPA and sort of the arts institutions, or?
Nope, completely unrelated. Under the terms of our agreements with the Baltimore Museum of Art and the Walters Art Gallery, the city pays for portions of
healthcare
of the benefit costs for employees at those two institutions.
Yeah.
And again, our budget projection
Got it.
was under what we actually saw against their roster. And so that's been something where my analyst has been working really closely with the HR teams at both of those agencies to make sure that what they're providing us, that the data that they're providing us as part of our budget build, that there are fewer discrepancies with the actual data that's driving the costs.
Understood.
There was some sort of breakdown there.
Understood. Was that in part because of the unionization and that their contracts, I assume, changed, or was that just we underestimated?
I think we just flat out underestimated.
Okay.
The data that was provided when we were forecasting the original costs understated what their actual staffing levels were and the actual costs based off those individuals.
Understood.
The convention complex, that was just a situation where there was a nuance with a new agreement that wasn't fully understood by my office, and so it wasn't properly budgeted in FY25. Cable and communication, this is one where we've been working with the director in order to look at their staffing model, what they have planned for the year, and ensure that we are budgeting as budgeting based off of that plan, presenting that proposed service level to the administration for a decision point so that we can fund that fund that office based off of the approved plan. City schools, the deficit that we're presenting here, the $12.9 million, is associated with a payment that the city was obligated to make associated with the City Springs redevelopment. This was one where there was a lot of back and forth about what was going to be the funding source, and ultimately the decision was made that was going to come from the general fund. And that was made when we were in fiscal '25, which is why it was not planned as part of the budget process. Employment, and then finally for the Mayor's Office of Employment Development with the YouthWorks costs in fiscal '25, what we saw is that a number of so YouthWorks is funded through a combination of the general fund, various grants that support the program, and then private contributions into the program. In fiscal '25, what we saw is that some of the non-city sources ended up coming in lower than what was forecasted as part of the budget. But what had happened is we had already incurred the cost, and so ultimately the general fund needed to absorb the remainder of the cost.
Got it. So what was the total overspend between all of those?
So the agencies that are that we are requesting supplementals for is $112.9 million. If If you will give me a moment, I can give you the overall deficit number. If we include all of if we include all of the mayoralty related items, net of the items that had a surplus. The deficit, I can provide that as a follow-up. I just want to, part of the issue here with city schools is that there was a prior year payment that hit in FY25. In talking with our accounting team, that payment will be accrued back to fiscal '24. And that's kind of mucking up my data here, so if I could provide that as a follow-up.
That's fine, sure. The overspend in terms of fire and police is a perennial challenge. Can you talk about what we are doing to continue to assert fiscal control within those agencies? We know that public safety is all of our first priority, and we also know that we have an obligation to keep our agencies within the margins and while keeping everyone safe. Can you talk a bit about I heard 47.5 for police and I think 38.5 for fire.
Yeah, so if we look at those two numbers combined, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that out of those amounts, about 20 million of that was coming from the contract costs for the police and fire unions that were approved for FY25. So if we take that 20 million out of the number, we certainly still have spending overages within both of the departments. I believe that what we saw in fiscal '25 should serve as the high mark, and we will start to see improvement as we go into fiscal '26, mainly because we've seen staffing levels in both departments dramatically improve. The other piece that's important to keep in mind when we think about the police and fire budgets is that in the case of fire, a number of the items that were causing them to go over budget, for example, the EMS services, the contractual EMS services, those are now funded in the FY26 budget. And so we should not see an overage associated with that. We're also seeing that on the fire suppression side of the house in the fire department, they're fully staffed. And so while we still see vacancies on EMS, we're not seeing the level of vacancies that we've seen over the last couple of years in terms of fire suppression. And so we should see the overall overtime costs in that department trend down as we move through fiscal '26. On the police side, similar story. A lot of their overtime in fiscal '25 was related to the level of vacancies that they had. What we know is that they have put some of their largest recruit classes through the academy, and they are either in training right now or starting to come out of training. And so we're seeing that our staffing level in the police department in FY26 is going to be one of the highest staffing levels that we've had in recent years. As we've looked at overtime data through the summer in the police department, we've seen that overtime expenditures have trended down by month, and that trend continued through the summer and into the fall. And so again, I believe that we should not see deficits to this magnitude in these departments for FY26. In terms of the spending controls, as I mentioned, we're doing things like having heightened review of all procurement activity to minimize or stop any unplanned purchasing activity, including in police and fire. If they are doing any sort of additional personnel actions that are unplanned or were not anticipated with the budget in their budget, we're working with them to identify ways to slow spending and reverse those trends. Under the direction of the city administrator, we're also leveraging different tools through the STAT process to work with both of those departments to monitor overtime on a biweekly and monthly basis.
I appreciate that. I will just, and we've had this conversation many a time before, just restate that this city council is going to be very, very concerned with precision, fiscal accuracy, making sure we're getting the best bang for our buck every time with the taxpayers. I do want to, again, commend the fact that staffing seems to be going up in several of our agencies. I think that is important and both additive in that we get more woman and manpower doing the work and also presumably less relying on overtime. That said, we're going to continue to have the conversation about overtime spending and supplementals and the way that it can cause distortion within our budgeting process when we sit down to negotiate. I wanted to ask about the $13.1 million surplus. Intent, how will that be distributed? How will that be spent? Can you just talk about how we're going to operate with that additional surplus?
Yes, and so, great question. At the board's next meeting on November 5th, BBMR will be bringing forward our carry forward recommendations. And that is where we have reviewed all of the agencies that ended fiscal 25 with a surplus. And we're reviewing the surpluses for each of those agencies to determine what balances need to be carried forward into FY26 to cover any sort of purchasing related activity that will straddle both fiscal years. And so what the board will see at its next meeting is the recommendations from BBMR to carry forward those appropriations for those agencies that were in surplus. I do believe that we will carry forward nearly all of the $13.1 million in order to meet the obligations associated with the intent of those appropriations. One thing I'd like to note is that our supplemental appropriations, because we are increasing the bottom line of the budget in this case and transferring funds, those items will be introduced to the City Council at the Council's Monday meeting. For referral to the Budget and Appropriations Committee and consideration by the full council. In the case of our carry forward appropriations that will be part of the November 5th agenda, those items will not require City Council approval because the funds are being carried forward for their intended use in FY26. And so they do not need to go back through council for consideration.
Understood. So this set of supplementals will be coming to City Council.
That's
Thank
correct.
you. Okay. Madam City Administrator, you.
Sure, thank you. So first, I want to thank Director Larson for always coming so prepared and informing us of where things stand with our budget. So thank you, Laura, for your leadership. And thank you to the Comptroller and the Council President for your questions today. I just wanted to note a couple of things, one of which is around personnel costs. So personnel costs are the drivers of the city's budget. And so Director Larson mentioned the impact of those contract negotiations last year and the timing of those negotiations last year and the impact on the fire and police budget. I also want to note that we are still in negotiations with all of our unions, and we're wrapping up with one of them, and it is now October 15th, right? So just noting that we, again, very similar to last year, and I actually think we're beyond where we were last year, that we are in active negotiations and still have not have contracts that have come to this board. So that will impact the current year's budget as well. And so we just always need to be cognizant of personnel costs and how they impact the budget as well as our contract negotiations, which we are, very close. And I appreciate the leadership and support of the Labor Commissioner and all of our unions who have been wonderful partners throughout this process. So I did want to note that for the record.
Thank you, Madam CA. Other questions from the board? Okay. Hearing and seeing no further questions, I would entertain a motion to approve this item.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of approving this item say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Please note, I will abstain on this item. Thank you. The next item on the non-routine agenda is SB 2513-588, a request from the Fire Department to approve an unauthorized procurement with Coven Collective LLC. On behalf of the Fire Department, we have Chief Administrator Hart Ms. Hart, the floor is yours.
Thank you. That amount is in the total of $200,390. I was waiting for the presentation. I'll go on and get started. Do you know who the presenter is? John Marsh. I can go in and get started.
Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead. Mr. Marsh.
Yeah, so the
you're
agency
working on it.
determined that funding would be best utilized to support a targeted communications campaign with two primary objectives. Those objectives included our smoke alarm education campaign, and in that, we wanted to enhance public education and awareness among our older adults, just concerning fire safety measures. We also gave a special focus on the use of smoke alarms that are tailored to individuals with hearing impairments. You all probably heard them referred to as bed shakers. And that campaign, that was a total of $50,530. The second was a recruitment campaign, and it focused on EMS. So we were trying to bring in EMTs, emergency medical technicians, and paramedics to strengthen our emergency services portion workforce. And so that was a total of $149,860. As we looked into what we wanted that campaign or those campaigns to include, we had a wide range or variety of advertising channels, and they included MTA bus advertisements, ads on local radio stations, social media advertising, digital out-of-home placements, also known as digital billboards, recruitment advertisement, and that was on Indeed.com. And then we also had paid search engine marketing. The violations and the nature of the violations. It included violating the Administrative Manual 303-01. And more specifically, contracts that are over $25,000 required the BOE approval, and that was disregarded. That did not occur. That didn't happen. The other side was the failure to advertise, and that is the $50,000 threshold for public advertising. That was not met. So that violated procurement transparency. As I stated, we went into this in March of 2025, so that was March 19th of 2025. We entered into an agreement for the advertising services with this vendor related to both campaigns. We now have in place deliverables that they need to meet, and that includes comprehensive campaign strategy development, project management services, creative campaign designs, media buying strategy formulation, execution of media buys, and analytic review and reporting. The payment was completed to Coven LLC on April 1st of 2025. What we still have to receive from them, or what is agreed that we will receive from them, are the services for the older adult campaign to be completed in November of 2025, and then the services for the recruitment and EMS, that's ongoing, but that will be completed by December of 2025. To avoid having this happen in the future, of course, we have corrective measures that we've put in place and that we are putting in place, and that involves strengthening our operations controls. And what we're doing is we require mandatory legal review for all contracts before we're executing them with our in-house attorney. We are also implementing a tiered approach or approval process based on dollar thresholds with oversight. That oversight will come from myself, from an executive assistant chief, and the chief of fire. We've made internal personnel changes. We have refresher training happening in the procurement process, and that will be for our command staff and all of our fiscal staff. And then also, we've developed internal contract performance tracking system, and we make sure we establish that to verify the receipt of deliverables before payment is authorized, and we do regular check-ins and milestone reviews for all advertising consulting contracts. And that concludes.
Questions from the board? I see Comptroller Henry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning.
Good morning.
So first of all, the slide that lists all of the changes that you've made to make sure that this doesn't happen again, that's great. And that's really what we want to see is, like, we understand people can make mistakes. We just want to see that they're learning to not make them again. What I will ask in a very leading fashion after several years of listening very closely to the Department of Audits. Seeing that you're making these changes in the process that will be helpful, that's great. Are you documenting these changes to ensure that people who are not there now yet will know to do this in the future?
Most certainly.
Okay, thank you. That's all I got.
That's about what I was going to ask, too. So, good stuff. Anyone else? Questions? Seeing and hearing none. Do we have a motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of approving this item say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The item is approved. Thank you. All right, next item on the agenda is, SB 2513810, a request from the mayor to approve the nonprofit payment agreement with the various nonprofit institutions commonly referred to as the Meds and Eds institutions. On behalf of the administration, we have Mr. Bradford. Mr. Bradford, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Council President, Mr. Comptroller, City Administrator, members of the board, Matthew Bradford, Chief of Staff for the Law Department. On behalf of the administration, the Law Department requests approval of 14 assessment agreements with nonprofit colleges and hospitals. These agreements will require the institutions to pay annual special assessments starting in FY27. For background, over the last 16 years under previous agreements, these organizations have contributed between $1.4 million to $6 million annually in special payments to the city. The most recent memorandum of understanding related to the assessments was executed in 2016 and was set to expire next year. Under that agreement, the total payments over a 10-year period was $60 million. The new 5-year agreements double the nonprofit's total assessment payments within 3 years from $6 million in FY27 to $12 million in FY30. And the total contribution over the 5 years will be approximately $48 million. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
I appreciate that. How are these figures determined and what makes them sufficient?
Sure. So my understanding is that multiple factors sort of guided the assessment number. First and foremost was the understanding that the institutions had to pay more. But the parties considered multiple things: the previous assessment amounts, other taxes and fees the institutions pay, services the institutions provide to city residents, and services the city provides to those institutions, and the uncertain financial climate. So I'm not aware of any sort of formulaic way in which these were derived. Those were the things that were considered in arriving at the number.
Understood. I will just say, I'm going to say for the record here, I think there's a decent amount of frustration at the way in which this deal was constructed. I think that this is structural, that Comptroller produced a really good report. He looked primarily at Boston in how they were able to come to, I think, a really strong pilot agreement. There was conversation about a task force. There was a bill. I think we are in a situation where, as long as this board continues to be determined by one person having 3 out of the 5 votes, we will continue to see this situation play out again and again and again. I know there is frustration in community. I heard some of it yesterday. I heard it the day this deal was announced about a lack of community process, about folks feeling like their voices were not reflected, about how we get to these kind of deals, and this idea that more voices should be part of the conversation. I'm not particularly mad at the Meds and Eds for doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is negotiate on their own behalf, especially at a time of real fiscal pressure on them coming from the Trump administration. We know that this is a tough time, and this is, to your point, more than the last deal. And I think there is frustration and disappointment out there that it could have been better. I'm going to leave it at that. Again, I want to just appreciate the negotiation that did occur, while noting my own disappointment that there was not a more inclusive process, that the bill that was going through council was short-circuited. I want to also just note and appreciate the comptroller's really good work on this. Spent a bunch of time looking at different places and trying to analyze what we could do, and I think really started this conversation in a way that did put pressure on all of us to push harder, and just to acknowledge that we are a town that is very reliant on our medical institutions and our schools. We have some of the best hospitals in the United States of America, some of the best colleges concentrated in any one area, and that the reality is that they also utilize a lot of city services that ultimately taxpayers absorb. It is a tricky situation that we all navigate, but I do want to just appreciate everybody, including all the groups that came forward and pushed and negotiated and advocated, because that kind of public pressure is important. I wish that we could have seen more. I wish that there was more of a willingness to engage some of those voices. But again, I appreciate the work that the solicitor's office did. Questions, comments from the board? Mr. Garbark?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to make a very quick point that this is only general fund contributions. None of the water bills, none of the utility bills are included. The institutions pay for all of that. I know there were some questions when we had our water rate hearing a few months ago, and I just wanted to put that on the record.
On that point, Mr. Comptroller, I know you did a deep dive on this. The services that do get utilized, what are they, just for the record, what are they, and how much in your analysis do those, was it 16 institutions? Is that?
It's 14.
14.
Well, it's 15 institutions, 14 agreements.
How much do those 14 institutions utilize?
So thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank you for the opportunity to try to stop taking credit for someone else's work, because our report referenced a previous report of the Finance Department in terms of the impact of the institutions. And I want to thank you for this opportunity to say publicly and widely, the media keep attributing that information to our report when that was not the case. And our report cites their report because that's what you're supposed to do. That being said, my understanding is that Finance had a series of calculations that came up with a total impact of about $120 million. And I'm looking over at the finance director to see if what he vaguely remembers is close to what I vaguely remember. It's something between 100 and 120 million, because that is, that's what they would be paying in property tax if the property that those institutions owned was taxable. The impact in services, I believe, is something around half that, between 47 and 50 million. And that was the number, just to give a little bit of relatively recent history. The reason we did our report was because 2 years ago this fall, the Finance Department launched their next 10-year financial plan. And one of the things they included in that financial plan was a desire to increase the amount of money that we collected from nonprofits to something closer to $50 million. And we saw that and we thought, okay, how can our office help? And so we went out and researched other places that have these types of agreements, and the most successful one has been in Boston. And so we focused our report on how did Boston come up with a way that manages to get more money out of their nonprofit institutions than Baltimore had in the past. And I'll continue that into, I appreciated the council president pointing out that one of the problems we are all facing right now is we have a federal administration that is consciously and purposefully trying to upend the business model of our nation's universities and hospitals. And while that basic way of doing business is under attack, it's really hard for us to try to be having conversations with them about what's a more equitable contribution for them to be making to support Baltimore City operations. And the last thing I do want to add is that just again, looking further back in history, because this is the third one of these agreements since I've been elected to office, and some people have forgotten that the first one of these agreements was basically this is what we're going to do instead of you doing something else. And that these 16 organizations with 14 agreements, because 2 of them are like these organizations, they are not the full nonprofit community in Baltimore City. They are literally the colleges, universities, and hospitals that came together as a group back in 2010 because we had a really bad deficit that year. And Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake, in an effort to close a budget gap, she proposed a bed fee. And that was going to be a fee that was going to be charged to colleges, universities that have beds for their students, and hospitals that have beds for their patients. They were going to charge a bed fee which would get around we can't tax you, but we can charge a fee. And in the back and forth around that bill, those institutions eventually said, hey, listen, instead of doing that, how about if we just voluntarily give you some money toward your operations every year? And that has been the practice that has been continued as each one runs out. So is this everything we wanted? No, but it's more than we were getting. So it's, that's kind of the essence of compromise. But I think the most important thing about this deal is it offers us time. And in the 5 years before we have to go through this again, we will hopefully get a new administration in Washington that will let colleges and universities and hospitals return to the previous normal business model so that we can have reasonable conversations. But also, I hope that it will give us the opportunity to move towards the more open and transparent process that our report called for emulating Boston, and that clearly, I mean, I can't say this part clearly enough, clearly there was public support for doing this in a different way. And I think that the next time we do this, if we don't do it in a different way, that's when I suspect that we'll be seeing pitchforks in the streets and things on fire. So that's my only comment, and I want to thank the law department and the administration and the institutions for working out something that gets us 60% more money than we got in the last one.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller, and thank you for not plagiarizing the work of the Finance Department. Apologies for not lifting up your original report. Appreciate that, Madam City Administrator. And thanks for the history as well.
Yes, absolutely. So that's what I was going to do, Mr. Comptroller, is actually lift up BBMR and some of the research and work that they have done around this issue. So thank you so much for acknowledging the hard work of the research part of BBMR. Also, thank you so much again for the history lesson as well that the Council President just mentioned. But I also wanted to take a point of privilege to thank everybody that was a part of advocating around the pilot agreement. I think the comptroller really nailed it on the head when he talked about, one, giving the history of how we got here, but then also talking about the impact or the importance of the public advocacy around this issue. So I just really want to thank you all, although, we're, bringing this forward now. It was that public advocacy, I think, that was critical to even putting the additional, I'll use the word pressure, I don't know if that's the right word here, on the institutions during a difficult time. This is a difficult time not just for us here in the city of Baltimore as we've tried to close multiple budget gaps, but now, one of our largest employers, and we think about not just the largest employer, but we also should be thinking about those small institutions that are hanging on by a thread. Some of those really small hospitals that we have here in Baltimore. And it is a very, very difficult moment and a very difficult time in our city's history because of what is happening down the road from us. And so I do want to acknowledge the institutions and their willingness to go a bit further, even during the most difficult times. And again, want to underscore the impact and the importance of the advocacy of every single citizen. I received an email every single day for 3 months, 4 months. I mean, I'm sure the other members of the board did as well. And I read those emails, and I really do want to underscore our appreciation, our deep, deep, deep appreciation for just the community engagement and the community interest in this topic.
Appreciate that. And again, I think it's worth underscoring, I think where there is disappointment, lingering disappointment, is around process. I haven't heard as much about outcome, more so about certain voices being at the table, others not. That said, everything CA said is true in terms of, and this is a very challenging time to be a hospital in a big city. It's a very challenging time to be a college in America, and do appreciate that they did go further than they have in the past. That being said, unless there are any other questions or comments, I will entertain a motion to approve this item.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of approving this item say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. This item is approved.
Thank you.
The next item on the non-routine agenda is SB 2513625, a request from the Mayor's Office and the Baltimore City Children and Youth Fund to note their financial plan for the FY 2026. On behalf of BCYF, we have Director Alicia Lee. Director Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to present BCYF's fiscal year 2026 budget to you all. BCYF exists, as many of you know because you were there at its founding, because Baltimore residents demanded a new way to invest in our city's young people, a way that's grounded in community voice, racial equity, and intergenerational leadership. We are an independent nonprofit that was established by city ordinance and accountable to both government and community, and managed through our memo of understanding with the city of Baltimore. Every system we built is designed to ensure transparency, fiscal discipline, and equitable opportunity for Baltimore's youth. And also just a reminder that we've been building infrastructure at BCYF has been our main critical component since 2022, where it was at 4%. And we are proud that today we stand at 76% of our infrastructure being built and implemented. Next slide. BCYF operates under one of the most comprehensive accountability frameworks in Baltimore's nonprofit landscape. We are independently audited every year. We report quarterly to the Department of Finance and hold annual hearings before City Council. In addition, all of our audits, IRS filings, and contracts are publicly available on our website, and our goal is for any resident to see how public dollars are spent and how it benefits Baltimore's young people directly. Next slide. BCUF has now received its third consecutive clean audit. We're proud to present our FY24 audit to you shortly after the next board meeting in November. And this confirms that our internal controls are sound and effective. The fourth audit for FY24 will be presented, has been presented to the board as clean, and following the next board meeting, once it's voted on, we'll present it to the comptroller's office. Since inception, we've invested over $40 million in youth-serving and community-based organizations all across the city of Baltimore, most of which are small, and many which are receiving their first time receiving public funds. Some, their first time receiving a grant of any sort after decades of work. Beyond grant making, we've also delivered over 460 hours of research-backed professional development and capacity building, helping organizations strengthen their operations and impact. Our independent evaluation by the University of Maryland verified that our dual investment model measurably improves organizational health and youth outcomes across the city. Next slide. BCUF's model is dual by design. First, we expand access to funding, especially for grassroots and Black-led organizations in our city that have been historically excluded from public funding systems. Second, we build capacity, providing research-backed technical assistance, coaching, and fiscal management support through our Learning Lab. And this support and this approach has helped us to reach an astronomical improvement around grantee compliance. So in fiscal year 2022, while we were just building programs and not implementing them, our grantee compliance was at 30%, which is dismal. And 1 year after the Learning Lab's launch, we were able to share that our compliance rate was 92%. We've been able to maintain that. And this year in FY26, we're so proud to have reached a world record for BCYF with 94% of our grantees in full compliance. I'd like to just share a little bit about what compliance is defined by. So next slide. BCYF has extensive reporting requirements. We require monthly financial expense reports at the present moment, but we are also open to them being quarterly as in alignment with our MOU. We also require quarterly programmatic reports. These are narrative reports and outcome-based reports that help us to understand and track progress of each grantee. We have annual deliverables like background checks, insurance verifications, site visits, all required by the City of Baltimore through our MOU. And we also have a two-part disbursement schedule that requires, that also lines up with making sure that all of those reports are done on a 6-month annual basis. Next slide. When I joined in BCYF in 2022 as their first employee, we were still in that startup phase and heavily relying on consultants, so I wanted to talk a little bit about consultant fees today. Since then, we've built a strong internal team, we've streamlined systems, we've built hundreds of standard operating procedures, and we've reduced external dependence by 60%. So that means that our professional fees, our consultant fees since FY22 have dropped by over nearly 60%. It's 59 points. So since FY22, going from $4 million to $1.63 million. And that reliance on consultants in the beginning of BCYF, before I was there, made a lot of sense just in terms of organizational maturity. The organization was entirely run by consultants for over 2 years. For FY26, we've budgeted $1.8 million in professional fees, which allows us to move forward with our internal cap of 10% of our total budget, covering essential legal, audit, and compliance services, in addition to technical support for grantees through our consultants. All contracts are board approved, and these investments protect public funds while allowing us to shift more dollars directly into community programs. Next slide. Our FY26 budget, as we're presenting today, reflects fiscal discipline and mission alignment. It directs this year 86 cents of every dollar straight into community grants, technical assistance, and specifically youth-led community grant review. This exceeds our ordinance requirements as the ordinance permits us to have 15% towards administrative costs. The administrative operations for FY26 remain under 9%, which is far below that 15% cap, and this budget was reviewed and approved by BCYF's board at our last board meeting in June. It was also presented to the public in June for feedback and collaboration, and we're proud to reflect that strong internal and external oversight. This year, BCF has made 2 strategic time-limited investments that align directly with our mission. First, there was a $4.9 million investment from our operating budget to support YouthWorks, ensuring that 8,500 Baltimore youth have access to paid summer employment. It should be noted that those funds went directly to support the youth stipends that were provided to young people across the city. In addition, $1 million from our fund balance went to support the mayor's summer youth engagement strategy, and it should be noted that those funds went directly to support many grassroots organizations with the violence interruption strategy for the summer, expanding safe, enriching activities citywide. Both initiatives were approved by BCYF's board and, most importantly, did not reduce community grant funds. These are mission-aligned collaborative investments that met an urgent youth need for the summer, while allowing us to maintain our fiscal responsibility. Transparency is not just an expectation at BCYF, it's our operating standard. BCYF has received, again, 3 consecutive clean independent audits, demonstrating strong internal controls. We comply fully every year with all city oversight and audit requirements, and every expenditure follows documented board-approved policies. Recent media coverage has mischaracterized our financial procedures and practices, but the record that we have is clear. Our audited results do show compliance, efficiency, and accountability, and most importantly, our compliance rating shows a high degree of success with our professional learning programs. We're proud to model what transparent, community accountable public investment looks like. Final 2 slides. BCYF is built by Baltimore residents, and it does belong to them. And so we are both independent in structure and accountable in our practices, ensuring public trust through rigorous oversight and transparency. And we welcome scrutiny, but also because accountability does, of course, build confidence. But we want to stand here today to assure everyone that every public dollar that we manage supports youth programs, it grows community power, and it strengthens Baltimore's future, most importantly. So these are the facts that define our accountability. BCYF has achieved 3 consecutive clean audits with 0 findings. We present our budget today to you. We've strengthened grantee compliance from 30% to 94%, and we've reduced consultant spending by 60%, and our administrative costs remain below 9% this year, well under our 15% ordinance cap. We continue to invest in the city's future through funding, most importantly through capacity building and learning and collaboration with all of you, ensuring that every public dollar advances opportunity for Baltimore's youth. And that's the conclusion.
Thank you, Director Lee. I will first note there is a bill in the City Council related to fiscal transparency, and so I'm going to somewhat restrict my questions and comments and say more during the process as it plays out. I will share brief history, my own history with the fund, which was, I know this is something that when folks started contemplating a children and youth fund, there was a feeling across the city that every time we would have a deficit, that it was youth that would suffer. Comptroller Henry was there for that part of it. I came in toward the tail end, but it was a lot of conversation about why is it that whenever we feel fiscally pinched, we're cutting rec centers, we're cutting programming for libraries, we're cutting programming that our children rely on. Then City Council President Jack Young introduced this legislation as a charter amendment in order to create a non-lapsing fund that would consistently support the programming of young people across the city, so that if any future mayor or city council president or city council lost its appetite to support children's programming, that this fund would still stand and continue to be a testament to the need for us to invest more into our kids. I was really proud at the time to write one of the ordinances that would ultimately become the youth fund. It was a complicated set of bills that went into it. There were, I will say, competing visions about how the administration of the board should administer the dollars. There was a lot of conversation at the time about supporting programs that frankly, had not been able to garner either political or philanthropic support. A lot of conversation about the need to be more participatory in how we invest in programming. I remember one of the points that I pressed, and I think an amendment that I introduced was having youth voice on the board, that young people should be a real meaningful part of the decision-making process, and that, you know, we don't do for people what young people themselves have the capacity to do. And so there's a lot of conversation about how do we get young people to really be part of not just being recipients of these dollars, but also being a part of the process of determining how to expend them. And that's something I was really proud of that the council considered at the time. As folks know, this became a charter amendment. It was overwhelmingly supported by the voters, the people of Baltimore, and I think continues to be a point of pride that our city has a children and youth fund. I think that, like any major legislation that moves a chunk of money through a charter amendment, there is always a need to go back and review and determine whether we are indeed following best practices, to have open conversation about what fiscal transparency looks like. From an accounting perspective, there's always a need to look at, do we have the right amalgamation of board members? Have we been hitting that goal of getting young people onto the board? Where do we need to strengthen our own accountability? Because at the end of the day, we're talking about public taxpayer dollars. And so I think there's a robust conversation happening about the Children and Youth Fund. And my assumption in all directions has been good intent. That I think the vast majority of people in our city believe, at least that's what the vote when we took it showed, believe that there should be a non-lapsing Children and Youth Fund, and that it should, beyond Jack Young, beyond Brandon Scott, beyond Zeke Cohen, beyond Bill Henry, it should continue to be there to support our kids. That said, I think there have been questions about the surplus that has existed for several years. Can you talk about what is the plan for the surplus?
Absolutely. And I just want to make mention that BCYF does have youth board members. I think there's 1 year, fiscal year of lapse of not having youth members on the committee, but that is really critical and important for us as well. We also have 46% of our grant reviewers are young people. Even this year at our upcoming gathering or our upcoming conference, 43% of the presenters will be young people. So we really also believe strongly in the power of young people and their decision-making power. In terms of the fund balance, when I came on, yes, there is a fund balance. The fund balance exists to ensure that BCYF can sustain our commitments of multi-year grants, also being able to weather any revenue delays that may happen, and also to ensure that we're able to just provide a strategic mission-aligned investment plan going forward. When I came on board, there was a fund balance, I believe, that was created because of the funds began to accrue as soon as the bill was passed, and there was not an agency or a mechanism to take it over. So when I came on in FY22, I believe there was somewhere around 30 million. The strategy that we've been utilizing, I believe it's around 19 million presently. The strategy that we've been using is to use a little bit of that fund balance every year to also infuse grant-making dollars into the streets of Baltimore. And at the same time, because BCYF is launching the city's first youth master plan work this October, which is very exciting. We hope all of you will participate in that. We also have already heard from community that there may be a call for a larger investment, specifically in terms of creating a community center or a place where organizations can have consistent programmatic space. So there is about 19 million that remains in the fund balance. We will work with community to figure out, is that something that over time people would like to see is spent slowly over time, or is there a call or a request for us to come back actually to this council and talk to you all as the Board of Estimates about making a bigger investment in a construction project. But for the time being, we always are going to maintain at least a moderate fund balance just as a nonprofit organization. But that large fund balance we have determined to spend down slowly. We also, just as a new organization, wouldn't have wanted to spend $30 million in 1 year to deploy that on the streets. Just a reminder that those first 2 years, the grantee compliance number was at 30%. Folks really needed to gain some skills and access points to be able to meet the challenging demands that our MOU places on small organizations, small grassroots places. But as we've surmounted that, we still don't think it's responsible to just unload $19 million in programmatic costs when there could be something greater, I think, in collaborative down the road. So that's where we are with the fund balance.
I appreciate that. I think where there's been some tension is around supporting governmental programs, right? There was, again, I'll take us back to when then Council President Young was constructing the fund. There was a lot of conversation about, to put it crudely, this not being a politician fund, that it would not be a situation where whenever there was a deficit, which we all in this business know is a complicated and loaded term, and sometimes deficits can appear and then be targeted in one direction or a different direction based on politics, based on folks' feelings, that it would not be a situation where a mayor, a council president, whomever would go and raid the youth fund in order to paper over for a budget deficit. I think we've seen that the reality of our fiscal situation, any city right now, is challenging, that there have been, we've talked already today, and we talked pretty much every Board of Estimates meeting about impacts from the federal government. But I think where there has been concern and consternation is around the decision by the board to utilize funds to support different city government supported programs. And I think where several of my colleagues and myself have deep concerns is that every process must be extremely transparent, and that there was some feeling when we talked during the summer that sometimes the numbers were changing, that there was just a lack of clarity about the application process by the administration. And so I'm wondering if you could talk, as we're heading into 26, about your expectation of will funds continue to go toward governmental programs, and how are we clarifying the process by which everybody has to apply to this fund?
Sure. Thank you for that opportunity. I just want to make clear, there was no lack of clarity, I think, from our department. I mean, from BCYF, we've always shared, been very transparent about our processes and shared. So I'm not sure what the lack of transparency or the confusion around numbers were. That wasn't from us. We've always shared the same exact numbers. I do want to also call out that I know we're not talking about the new bill that's on the table, but just speaking about seats on the board, the new bill does decrease youth seats on the board in favor of political appointees. So just wanting to make sure that we're balancing that out and making sure that young people continue to have a place at BCYF to make decisions. In terms of the decision by the board this summer to invest in YouthWorks and to also invest in the mayor's strategy, I think the board has been very transparent in that process. So much so that the board even delayed voting on it by 2 weeks to go in community and meet with some of our grantees to talk about impacts, specifically around YouthWorks. And what they found and came back to the board together to collaboratively discuss was the impact it would have on grassroots organizations. So many of our grantees rely, and we put out a lot of content about that all summer, rely on YouthWorks for participant numbers and also for staffing. And so it would have been really a catastrophe for them so late in the process to find that they wouldn't have the staff that they needed. Also, with the announcement about this investment, it was very clear the board shared several times this was a one-time emergency investment. We understand, especially with all of the landscape of ARPA and also, of course, with whatever's coming down the pike from Washington this year, that there may be deficits, but BCYF cannot be expected to fill those deficits for YouthWorks, even though YouthWorks is a really critical component of our strategy, and it's a big part of the ecosystem of youth development in our city. So we're happy to work collaboratively, but that investment was a one-time investment. And we're also proud of the investment, making sure that the investment went directly towards stipends for young people. So those dollars went directly into the pockets of young people. We also talked to some families, like young people who maybe are not as tapped into youth programming in our city, about the impact of YouthWorks dollars on family household dollars. And it was pretty clear that that would be again, so late in the year, with the summer approaching, the board really did feel under strong conflict around making such a large investment, but also they decided, and I was at the board meeting, they decided to prioritize the children, and that was the main focus, was like, what do young people need? I think there was a real strong understanding in the room, and that's why the board vote was delayed and people took extra time, that the decision would not be popular no matter what the decision was, because the headlines will read as they will. BCYF refuses to support YouthWorks. 4,000 young people don't have jobs this summer. Thanks, BCYF. Is another version of reality that people also considered. And so they balanced the idea of not considering the public backlash, but really considering what do grassroots organizations and young people need, and then making a plea to you all as city government to ensure that you ensure that next year that these young people have access to these jobs and understand that BCF won't be able to support. So that is my understanding of the process, and the board has tried to be very transparent about that with the announcement that they made, and also with the language of one-time investment, one-time emergency investment, and also sharing the rationale for the investment, despite understanding that, again, no matter what the decision was, there would be frustration from community and maybe even from government as well.
I appreciate that. I will just state for the record, we had multiple hearings, one that was at a high school, one that was in the budget committee, and I do believe the numbers shifted.
I've only presented once, and I know I presented the same steady number.
Fair. I'm happy to go back and double, triple check, but I am quite sure for the record that the number changed.
Yes.
That said, do appreciate the dilemma and the challenge of that consideration, but could you talk about what it means for like a one-time emergency? Like, how does that comport with sort of structurally, programmatically, how the fund operates?
Sure. Well, we're asking you all, that's why we made the announcement very public and transparent. We're asking the Board of Estimates and community to all help BCYF as well to hold itself accountable that this is a one-time investment. So the question may come up again. The board, as it stands, has already determined last year they would vote no going forward on that kind of investment. And so we would then rely on, again, community to help us hold accountable to that promise. So that's why the promise was made so publicly, and the language was chosen deliberately so that BCYF's board was stating right up front what their involvement can be going forward, specifically around youth work.
Director Lee, just appreciate that. Just so I'm clear, what would you say, what would you say no to?
Youth work specifically. Youth work specifically. So if there's a request in FY26 for us to consider for FY27 an investment in youth works, the answer already the board has shared is that would not be possible. That doesn't mean that we can't partner with other government agencies on projects. Like, we're open to partnering with Rec and Parks. We just had a meeting with them last week. We took 50 grantees down to Druid Hill Park to learn about all of the opportunities to provide programming at Rec and Parks. So it doesn't mean that we don't want to collaborate with city agencies, but specifically a request for YouthWorks funding in FY26 that would take place in FY27. The board has shared that they would deny that request, and they would ask the community and the Board of Estimates and everyone else who saw those releases that we've produced all summer to hold us accountable towards that promise.
Okay, just so I'm clear, again, for the future, like from now until forever, or until there's a new board and a new director, that the board would reject any request for YouthWorks
In
specifically?
FY '27. I
Okay.
think they've just spoken about that. I think the idea would be that BCYF has considered investing in YouthWorks before. Before I was here, just based off looking at archival documents, there were meetings in 2022 and 2021 to make a sizable investment in YouthWorks at that time. So there's never been a concern about YouthWorks in particular. It's really about the process of supporting an emergency investment for the city that was youth-focused. That investment was made for a one-time piece. But there hasn't been, at least to my knowledge before this, there hadn't been any question that BCYF would support or partner with the city to support youth-initiated or youth-centered programming, as long as, again, those components were board-approved. So, because those conversations have happened in the past based off of archival documents, and I've even had those kinds of conversations with government agencies, and sometimes the board approves those requests, and sometimes the board denies them, depending on what they consider to be a priority and how it aligns with the priorities that we have at BCYF, which are community-derived.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll just say, for me, at least in trying to listen to my colleagues as well, I think there is like a broad swath of support for YouthWorks. I take enormous pride. I think Baltimore runs a better summer jobs program than just about any other city in America. Like, pound for pound, I think we're better than New York, Chicago. Like, I've gone and checked out their summer jobs programs. I think ours is like really a point of pride. It's not, to me at least, it's not the YouthWorks is the wrong thing. It's more the process by which we got there. And so
I see.
it just to me, it's like not about, I think YouthWorks does extraordinary work. They support young people, the summer jobs opportunity, and now expanding into year-round jobs, and thinking about career pipelines and some really great conversations that the mayor and I and city schools and a bunch of folks have had. I think YouthWorks is one of our better governmental programs that we run here in the city. To me, it's the emergency nature of it. It's the it's the process and decision making that
I can share, following this meeting, just some documentation around the aligned grant making process, which is a documented process, but is different than the Grassroots Fund, the Community Accountable Fund, and the President's Fund. It is a process by which organizations submit proposals verbally or in writing to the board. So the Summer Funding Collaborative, for example, is an example of an aligned grant making grant that started in FY22, I think at $2.5 million, and that didn't follow a community grant review process, but there was a community grant review process, I guess, included in the grant making process later. There was also a grant to Fusion and a grant to B-City at that time as well, that follows that aligned grant making process. So those bigger investments are made in that process, and I can show some documents about what that process looks like, so you guys can see that it's a parallel process, but we of course would love feedback on the process as well.
Great. Before I stop talking, I do want to just acknowledge, again, the complications as we wrote this legislation, as Mayor Young, City Council President Young wrote this legislation, that there were a lot of competing views on what this youth fund should do and who it should support and how it should support, and none of this is easy. And it is, I think, eternally complicated in a city that has many young people whose basic needs are still not being met, to try to figure out what is the best way to support and to build their capacity and to build their civic ability to distribute grants and to do governance and to be part of serious processes that result in millions of dollars moving around. And so just, for the record, I continue to support the need for our youth fund and the extraordinary potential it has to make a real dent and a real impact on young people. I think the conversation is going to continue to be about what is the best way to get there. How do we truly demonstrate and model transparency at a moment where many people do not believe in government anymore? And so Just want to appreciate the complexity of all this. I see City Administrator Leach.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to Director Lee for your presentation and then just for the way that you've been leading this organization. You should be really proud of what you've accomplished in your time leading that organization. I do want to bring us back to the item that is before the board, which is noting the financial plan for FY26. I think it's important to spend time on this topic in particular because this is a part of the memorandum of understanding that we actually have with the Youth Fund, where they do get to note their budget. They bring their annual audits to the Board of Estimates as well. And so all of this is noted in that MOU, and it is a part of that transparency that we actively practice with the Children and Youth Fund. And so what is before us today is us actually modeling the transparency that Director Lee just talked about in her presentation as we get to note their FY26 financial plan. And then I do believe that their 24, it's the 24 audit that's coming.
24 audit is coming down.
Yep, so we're going to get the FY24 audit after it's approved by the board. This board will get to take a closer look at that audit as well. But these are ongoing practices that come before this body that every single year that the Children and Youth Fund has been active and under Director Lee's leadership, we've been noting their financial plan. We've been receiving their audits as the Board of Estimates. So I just wanted to take a moment to note that. I do want to transition over a bit to talk a little bit about just the funding for the summer. So I think it's important to provide a little history and context here to talk about how we ended up where we did last summer. So if we'll recall, obviously we received $641 million through American Rescue Plan Act dollars, and there was a significant portion of those American Rescue Plan Act dollars that was set aside specifically for young people and for YouthWorks in particular. So during the time that we received ARPA, there was also legislation in place that, of course, increased the minimum wage. And so we had to pay our young people, as they deserve, $15 an hour, which, of course, reduced the number of slots that were available for the city to provide to young people. We supplemented that with ARPA, but, of course, ARPA ended. And so, obviously, we had to figure out how to continue to support young people. We've been able to provide young people, I think, over 8,500 young people were able to work this past summer. We were faced with a conundrum of that number dropping down to about 3,500 young people. And we know how important it is to have a summer job, especially right here in the city of Baltimore. And so, of course, really appreciate the partnership between the Children and Youth Fund and their willingness to directly support our young people. I think that's the most important part about this thing. There's a lot of discussion around adults and what we should do for young people. But when we talk to young people directly, which we do every year prior to rolling out some of the summer youth engagement programming, one of the number one things they say to us is, we need a summer job. We need a job. We want to work. I think Director Lee underscored it when she talked about not only the impact to young people, but also their families and those families that depend on those young people to have that summer job. And so there were some critical decisions that I think we had to make as an administration, and we made those decisions, and we prioritized our young people. And this was money that went not to anyone in the administration or any program in the administration. It went directly into the pockets of young people. Those young people got that $15 an hour stipend in their pocket, and it came from money that came through the Children and Youth Fund. The other thing that's important to note here, when we think about the entire summer funding landscape, a lot of dollars dried up. So the ESSER dollars that the school system was receiving dried up. I think we lost about 12,000 slots, if I'm not mistaken. When I was leading the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success a very long time ago, and leading a lot of the summer funding work that is before us, we had over 20,000, it was almost 30,000 slots for young people. So between YouthWorks, between the slots that were available through the school system, because I think the school system did about 12,000 if I'm not mistaken, and just through the Summer Funding Collaborative and nonprofit organizations that were working with young people, we were able to collectively put 20,000 slots for young people. So there was something for, a lot of our young people to do throughout the summer where they could get paid or obviously continue their education through school. And we were facing a cliff where ARPA funding ended for YouthWorks, and that number was going to drop to 3,000. The ESSER-funded summer slots were no longer available for our young people. And so the money for our young people dried up right before our eyes as a city. And there is a lot of work that we need to do before heading into this upcoming summer. But anytime I'm faced with an opportunity or a decision, and I think I can speak safely for the mayor, where we have to choose, our young people and opportunities for our young people, we're going to figure out how to support and lift up our young people. And they needed summer jobs, and they needed programming. They also needed safe spaces, right? When you think about the mayor's summer youth engagement strategy. And so that is exactly what this administration prioritized. I do look forward to a robust conversation and discussion, but did also want to, again, close out with commending the board at the Children and Youth Fund, who I think there's some tremendous leaders who absolutely adore and are committed to our young people, and of course, Director Lee for her leadership.
Thank you, Madam Administrator. Comptroller, you jumping in?
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I want to especially thank you for restraining yourself in the comments today, given the comments that are to come during the actual legislative process around the bill. Since I am no longer a member of that august body, I will not be restraining myself today, and so if anybody wants to settle in and get comfortable, what I did want to start with is actually to the item at hand. You talked a little bit about the increase in compliance, which I'm very happy for as well. And can you just talk a little bit about what performance metrics are in place for the grantees? Like,
Sure.
What do you judge on?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So compliance is based off of, let me pull up that slide. So there are contractual compliance requirements, like our financial expense reports, which is a really arduous process. Sometimes there's as many as 6 to 7 documents for one expense, because we require audit level detail in our documentation. We also require monthly reports to MOED. Through the local hiring analysis program. We also require quarterly programmatic reports, an annual site visit. We also have a requirement around background checks. We have a pretty heavy insurance verification process, so a heavy level of insurance is required for all grantees. In addition to, criminal history, grants manual review, budget, and outcomes. So we're also monitoring outcomes for each program through the quarterly programmatic report. I also share that programmatic outcomes are determined by each grantee in alignment with the grant-making priorities that have been set forward by the community. So in the application process, organizations submit a series of outcomes that they will track over the course of their grant. And we're monitoring each quarter to make sure that there's improvements, and when not, assigning technical assistance or professional development offerings from our 350 hours of PD that are available to the ecosystem every year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I do want to speak a little bit to the larger issue addressed by both the city administrator and the council president in regards to the decision by the Youth Fund to put a substantial amount of money into YouthWorks this past summer, which is, I don't have any, I hold no anger at the Youth Fund for helping our kids. And it's not, I mean, it's very understandable to say the administration found itself in a tough spot, and in which case we should all be happy that the Youth Fund was able to help us out of a tough spot. In keeping with the way I was raised, I blame myself, and I blame the city council when we set up the Youth Fund. We did a lot of the same things that government has done historically, which is we wrote some stuff down but relied on a sort of understanding that some other stuff would or would not happen. And if the last 6 months of paying attention to what's happened to our federal government has taught us anything, it's that you cannot rely on historical understanding to ensure that people do what they were expected to do. You do need to write some stuff down. And 5, 6, 7, how many years ago, what's the youth?
2019.
Yeah, it's like 7 years ago, we did not clarify any kind of maintenance of effort when we set up a separate fund that was going to specifically deal with youth-related activities with an intention of supporting community-based youth activities that were not being sufficiently supported by the existing philanthropic ecosystem. That was the point. The point was there were these organizations that weren't being supported, and it would be a good thing for us to commit an ongoing percentage of our money to supporting kids through those organizations. That was the goal, but we didn't write all of that down. Okay, and so to some extent, I appreciate the fact that the City Council is doing its job and going back and revisiting the issue and saying, what didn't we write down that maybe we should have written down the first time? I'll opine further about that later. But also, just a note, there's a bumper sticker that I was always fond of. It said, wouldn't it be great if schools and rec centers had all the money they needed and the Pentagon had to throw a bake sale to buy a bomber? And when I was a kid, I was just like, that's cute. But as I became somebody who worked in government, it really hit home. Yesterday morning, I was fortunate enough to watch an interview with our governor, Wes Moore. He was interviewed by David Rubenstein as part of the Baltimore Banner's Impact Maryland at Symphony Hall. And he said very specifically, he said, I'm not really a policy guy, but I'm a budget guy, which I thought was kind of funny because I understood exactly what he meant, because it's all of my policy professors who hammered home the budget is the ultimate policy document. That is where you put your priorities. And I have watched several mayors, not the current one, and I am happy that he is not in this group. I have watched several mayors stand in front of the people of Baltimore and say that they were not able to make sure that all of the kids who applied for YouthWorks were able to be given positions because the business community had not stepped up sufficiently. That we made it clear that taking care of our kids and giving them something meaningful to do in the summer was something upon which we relied on the generosity of others to make happen. And it was not something that we made sure we found money for in our budget. And I know that the current administration has been trying to do that, and I appreciate that. But the question is, and I think you've laid this out, we cannot always turn to the Children and Youth Fund to fill in that gap. If, like you guys, you did a solid this year, and we're grateful, but we're not going to rely upon that as a year after year kind of thing. And that's what I think you said your board has already affirmed. Is that true?
Correct.
Okay. You mentioned this coming bill, and I know that this is getting a little bit away from the item before us, but I just wanted, because I think there's some confusion over this issue. You said it decreases the number of youth seats.
That's correct.
In favor of governmental
That's correct.
representatives. And my understanding is that currently there is a requirement for the board that a certain percentage of seats on the board be held for youth.
Yes.
As a minimum percentage, not a maximum,
That's
a
correct.
minimum. And that the city council bill reduces that percentage.
Yes.
So I just wanted to take this opportunity to clear up what might be a misunderstanding. That does not reduce the number of youth seats.
It does, because there's still a cap on the number of total seats.
No,
And the
no,
more-
no. Reducing a minimum doesn't, you can still choose to put more, the same amount of youth on. You will simply be exceeding the percentage required by law.
Sure, but to the letter of the law, it does make a reduction.
No, that's exactly my point.
Okay.
It's not, the letter of the law is said, there's a difference between a floor and a ceiling. If the city council was reducing the total number of youth you're allowed to have on the board,
Sure.
that would be a reduction in seats.
Sure.
But what the council's bill does, as I understand it, is actually about giving you more flexibility. That if you hit a year where you don't find as many young people that are up to the standards you want for being on your board, you're not going to feel a pressure to add extra young people above what you found just to meet the arbitrary standard in the legislation.
I would argue on behalf of young people, they don't want that. Young people want to be present on the board, and the 1/3 number is the number that the community determined was realistic, and we'd like to maintain that number. And as the director, I think that we should be held accountable to maintaining 1/3 of the board is comprised of young people. I don't see a reason, because there was 1 year of lapse, to
But-
reduce the number.
And I'm going to press on this. I'm going to press on this because I feel that the math is in my favor, so I
Sure,
think I can
sure.
win this one. Okay. Having a lower threshold as allowable
Yes.
does not stop you from having
That's
as
correct.
many youth members on the board as you want.
That's correct, but also to your point around historical and writing things down, you can hold me accountable. I mean, I'd like to make sure that there's 1/4, but the next director and the next board, right, is required to meet that minimum that's there. And so.
So they might, right, yes,
Right,
you're right.
right.
In the future,
Right.
in the future, the board may decide that they want to have fewer youth members.
Okay.
And you're saying you don't want the city council to give your board that level of flexibility.
No, because the community already spoke that they wanted 1/3 of the committee to be comprised of young people. And so I think the community spoke, and that's where that number came from. BCF should be held accountable to maintaining that number. So I think there was a lapse in FY '25 where there were not young people on the board. That lapse, I'm speaking as the president and CEO of BCYF, should not change legislation to say, let's lower the expectation. It should say, BCYF, you have to make sure that those young people are present. Those young people are present FY '26. They're going to be presented to city council shortly for review. But that one lapse, or that one area of our inability to meet a success metric shouldn't change the metric. The young
Okay,
people,
so since
it's important to the community.
Since it's clear this isn't a miscommunication or a misunderstanding,
Sure.
I'm happy to accept that, okay, this is we're on 2 different pages.
Sure.
So, okay. And the council will do what the council will do.
Got it.
My suspicion is that the council thought that this was a positive in terms of giving the board a greater level of flexibility, and that if the board does not want a greater level of flexibility, it will not be hard to convince
I think
the council of
messaging
that?
of
Okay.
that, coupled with the additional political appointments, doesn't feel that way. And I would just say that I think those kinds of miscommunications might be able to be resolved just by us being more in
Yeah.
communication with
I
each
think,
other.
yeah, I suspect this is, with so many things, it's just a matter
More
of
discussion.
sitting down, talking. The last question I want to ask, and I'm asking this because this is a conversation I have had with other philanthropic institutions, and I am curious how the Children and Youth Fund sees this, given that it is such a big part of your role and your intention to do capacity building. There is a concern that the overall nonprofit community in Baltimore City exceeds what the existing philanthropic ecosystem can actually support. Which is a really genteel way of saying there appear to be more and more little nonprofits every year, but it's not like there's a commensurate growth in foundations. And so more and more nonprofits means more and more competition for a giving stream that is not getting bigger and bigger to match that. Does your capacity building ever extend towards looking for opportunities for consolidation? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So we have two streams of learning, specifically looking at what I would say are considerations around merging, and also considerations around starting in the first place.
Yeah.
So we have a digital learning program called B-Creds that is free and open to any organization or person who's youth serving in the city of Baltimore. The course that we're getting ready to debut is called Nonprofit by Nature, and it's specifically to address this big concern that I saw during the spring while I was teaching the nonprofit infrastructure course myself to a group of 40 grantees. A lot of organizations started a nonprofit that really should have started a for-profit business. Some people have programs that are really temporary, but they started permanent businesses. They should have gone a fiscal sponsor route. Some people should have collaborated with a person who's already existing in the ecosystem to bolster and to amplify the programming that's already occurring. And people just don't know that information up front. So we've provided some training around that. To our existing grantees and also to other members of the ecosystem, because we don't provide capacity building just to our grantees. Any organization is eligible if they serve young people in the city. And then we're also debuting this free digital course in December where we want to encourage everyone to take it. It's called Nonprofit by Nature, and it really will help you to make a better decision about the business model that you're thinking about. But mergers are a big reality in this new ecosystem. I'm sure everyone has seen the federal attacks on nonprofits that have come down the pike. And so thinking about merging is a realistic thing that a lot of people are going to have to consider. In addition, I will say one of the things that combats, nonprofit fatigue is a community grant review process. Community members know which organizations are the most potent. And so the more that we allow the folks who are closest to the problems to determine the solutions and make decisions about revenue and where it goes, we're able to find the programs that really work and bolster those programs and invest in them from a capacity building place. So I would also just throw out that that's one of the ways, instead of maybe some of the more traditional routes of philanthropy, but really allowing the community to speak and to point at the programs that are the most potent in the community.
That's outstanding. Thank you. Have you had any of these conversations with other foundations?
Yes, we have. And I would say the philanthropic community, as many of you know, they're full of people who are incredible individuals who are all really focused on, I think, the small and the large and thinking about equity and thinking about ways that we can make our city better. So there's a lot of love and a lot of compassion. And at the same time, we still do have traditional philanthropic structures that do limit access for smaller organizations like many of the ones that we represent. So we're in constant communication with some of those folks about ways that, especially as our grantees begin to deboard from us after 5 years, what's the next step for them to create more sustainability?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
I do want to just go back, because actually this matters to me, about the youth serving on the board. Again, both as the person who I think, and I'm trying to get my memory straight on this, but like wrote that amendment to include young people on the board. And also as someone who ran an organization that taught civic leadership and community organizing to young people for about 8 years, it's really important that, putting aside the comptroller's well-made point about the difference between a floor and a ceiling, and that I think no one on the council is saying that there should not be young people. My understanding in speaking to the sponsor of the bill is I don't think it's accurate that there was just 1 year of lapse of young people, not enough young people hitting that threshold. I think it was several years of lapse. And I think the point of that part of this legislation was to provide support and to say, like, we're really serious about getting to this number. Again, I just don't think it's accurate to say there was 1 year of miss. I think it was multiple years of not having the right amount of young people on the board, and some years of not having any young people on the board. And so, again, just it is important to me as we have this conversation in front of the City Council, as we have it here at the Board of Estimates, that we continue to support the growth and civic capacity of young people to serve in these types of positions. And I genuinely do appreciate the commitment and the push that I think the organization is currently making. Again, at the time of this ordinance, there was a lot of conversation about how will young people get trained? How will they be able to, right? Because this is complicated stuff. It's not how to administer a grant, how to effectively oversee an organization, how to determine bylaws. And I mean, this is, challenging stuff that sometimes adults can trip over. We've all seen organizations where a board did not do enough to either support the leadership or hold leadership accountable, and there were challenges. And so there was just a really robust conversation, I remember having it at the time, about, like, could Baltimore do this? And I think where there is continued room for conversation between the council, between the administration, between the youth fund, your leadership, and your board's leadership, is really about how do we get there and how do we make 25, 33, 40% a reality that is both attainable year over year so that we're not falling short. Because I will again say, to me, this was a really important part of the thing, was that part of this project, like Bill Henry said, was about getting to organizations that weren't your Boys and Girls Club, weren't your big box nonprofits that everybody knows and loves, and that have received philanthropic or governmental support because they're good at advocating, but organizations that maybe out of a church basement, maybe out of someone's kitchen, maybe, but are still having a profound impact on the lives of children, and how do we get to them? But one thing that was extremely important at the time, and remains to this council extremely important, is that part of this project is about developing young people's civic capacity, their capacity to participate in participatory budgeting, their ability to analyze, determine, and sort through. Because, like my friend said, we got a ton of nonprofits in this town, many of which need support, many of which have been hurt. We're going to say this again and again and again. This is the theme of this year, but have been hurt by the federal administration and have lost money. And so I just want to, for the record, state that it is extremely important to me as the presiding officer, as the council president, as it was 7 years ago, or whenever it was, 7 years ago, when we wrote that part of the ordinance, that youth voice continues to be a driving factor, and that my analysis of it, I think, again, I don't want to speak for the bill sponsor, but that we were not consistently hitting that mark. I do appreciate that. I think you have made it a priority, and so I look forward to continuing the conversation and about how do we all get there.
Thank you so much. I just want to say, I don't know if this is my closing remark, but I do want to share again, just for the record, that my statement still does stand, and there have been youth board members in every fiscal year since I've joined, except for FY25. And that's what I've seen in writing from the sponsor of the bill to other folks in our community, that there were no youth board members. Were there the number of board members that met the quota? Probably not. We can count that number, but there were youth board members. I believe that the author of the bill has been sending out emails that there never have been youth board members before. And I just want to share that I believe Councilman Parker, especially because he's a new member of our board, is operating under, of course, like love of children and interest in BCYF. But I would just implore all of us to, like you said, for us to work together so that any misinformation can be corrected and we make sure that we're not creating new rules and legislation that does limit. Another area in the bill is putting a cap on the grants that grassroots organizations can receive based on their prior expenditures. For Black and brown organizations that we've all talked about today that have been disinvested in for decades, that doesn't work. That limits their capacity for growth. So I'm sure that was another provision that was put in from a place of wanting to do well. But if we don't all work together and collaborate and share about the impacts of some of these pieces that are in the bill, then we will create a bill that will create harm instead of course, like we all want, which is something that will drive us forward. So we just would plead for more conversation. We'd love to meet. Our grantees are eager to connect and discuss. And so we are as well. And so we just look forward to being in conversation with folks so we can make sure that we all understand the impacts of all of the provisions that are provided there.
I really appreciate that. I'm looking
Thank
forward
you.
to those conversations. My understanding is that there were no youth board members in fiscal 21, that there were 3 in 22, and that there were none in FY 23, 24. I'm looking forward
Yeah,
to
that's not correct.
having that conversation with you.
Can I check something?
Absolutely.
So just see if, like, I always look for what's the in-between. If the city council stopped saying there haven't been any youth members, would you be comfortable not saying the city council is trying to reduce the number of youth members?
I would be most comfortable if the city council members would meet with grantees and the board and staff so that we can share all of our concerns. There's about 12 to 15 points of concern so that we can understand, of course, their intentions and better be able to talk about the impacts.
I'm down with that.
Okay.
But to the point of the one issue that I just raised,
Yes.
is that something where there could be some agreement?
I think I would agree to say that there's not a repeal on youth voice if there wasn't a change in the minimum requirement.
No, that's not what I was saying.
Oh, got it.
Okay, I'm saying.
She's saying what she is willing to
I-
accept.
Well, that's what you're not.
So saying that there was if we all agree that Lewis was on the board, which we have to agree, that he was there, then that doesn't change the fact that I don't think we should lower the floor, we should lower expectations. because DCF didn't meet it.
That's a position. I'm not talking about a position.
Sure.
I'm talking about things we say out to the world.
Yes.
That influence what the world thinks about what is actually happening.
Yes.
If the council stopped saying there has never been a youth representative, which is untrue,
Right.
would you and BCYF stop saying the council is trying to reduce the number of youth members, which is also not factually correct?
What I would say is I would edit that to say exactly what the bill says, which is that the council is reducing the requirement.
Yes.
That's what I would say.
That's
going
fine,
forward.
okay.
Regardless
That's-
of
that's-
whether the council stops or not.
That's got-
I would
okay.
want to make sure that I'm presenting the bill as factually as possible.
Excellent,
I
thank you.
appreciate that. Just for the record, I've seen no communication, and I'd be happy to look at some where any council member has said there has been no youth participation.
share. Yeah.
Please do
Yeah.
after this meeting. And I will also state for the record that
Yes.
I have personally met with several grantees. I know Councilmember Parker, in response to some of the feedback and in the legislative process, has been meeting with grantees. I look forward to continuing that process
Thank you.
with you, your administration, and your board.
We appreciate you.
Unless there are further questions.
That was not actually the president banging the gavel, that was a little clip.
I will note this item. Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. Thank you, Director.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
The final item on the agenda is SB 2513539, a request from the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs to approve a consultant agreement with R.E. Harris Consulting, LLC, on behalf of the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs. We have, I believe, I am so sorry.
Not a
I see, is it Deputy Director Jackson? Is that
Correct.
Okay, great. Deputy Director Jackson.
Great. Good morning, Mr. Council President, Mr. Comptroller, honorable members of the board. Again, my name is Lauren Jackson. I am the Deputy Director of the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs. So, as you all know, I believe we're getting our slides up, but as you all know, in 2018, Baltimore City initiated legal action against various pharmaceutical manufacturers and distributors for their role in creating the opioid epidemic in Baltimore City. The city has reached settlements totaling more than $570 million with these companies. As outlined in Mayor Scott's executive order establishing the framework for administering Baltimore's opioid restitution fund, the Recovery Office is responsible for developing grant agreements, dispersing funds, and providing oversight and monitoring of funded organizations in partnership with the Baltimore City Mayor's Office of Overdose Response, or BC More. In carrying out this work, the Recovery Office has been facilitating agreements with organizations and programs named in the various settlement agreements with pharmaceutical companies. Since the Recovery Office has been appropriated these funds, all agreements are executed directly between the Recovery Office and each funding recipient. However, decisions regarding the scope of each agreement and the subsequent monitoring of those agreements are all done in partnership with BC More. Go to the next slide. This item before you is a professional services agreement with R.E. Harris Consulting, LLC, which is one such agreement and represents a portion of the 24/7 outreach program, which was named in the Walgreens settlement agreement. This agreement, this professional services agreement, was developed in collaboration with the law department and falls within the de facto professional services list approved by the Board of Estimates, specifically for management consulting services that support staffing, strategic planning, and related management functions. At this time, I'll turn it over to BC More Executive Director Sarah Whaley to speak more about the selection of R.E. Harris Consulting LLC and their proposed scope of services in support of the 24/7 outreach program.
Thank you, Lauren, and good morning. Board members, I'm Sarah Whaley, the Executive Director of Overdose Response. A little bit of background on the 24/7 outreach program. As Lauren mentioned, this was named in the settlement, but is not a service that the city currently provides. The concept was outlined in paragraph 97 of the consent decree, and details for the program were outlined by the Behavioral Health Collaborative. This initiative would provide non-emergency outreach services that would be a connection to permanent housing and continuity of care in the community, would operate 24/7, would be comprised of people with lived experience to support a behavioral health clinician, be accessible to emergency responders, and be accessible to the general public for third-party calls or community referrals, which would fill a gap in our current 911 diversion program. This work is part of the city's umbrella of alternative response services, and there are other funding earmarks within the settlements that may meet some of these program components. Therefore, it's essential that to the success of this program to ensure coordination across new programming and existing city services. Selection for our consultant was based on the goals of this initiative, and the tasks of the consultant would be defined by the scope, would be to define the scope of 24/7 outreach as a project as part of the city's whole behavioral health ecosystem, and to create a plan for implementation of this new initiative. We selected R.E. Harris Consulting for this role for several reasons. They have a combination of both clinical expertise, operational leadership, and systems level innovation. Their lead consultant, Bobby Harris, has over 9 years of experience that uniquely position him to advance this work. He has built and scaled integrated models of care that unite mobile health, street-based medicine, telemedicine, both providing direct patient care and developing programs that expand access to medications for opioid use disorder, or MOUD, wound care, infectious disease treatment, all across Baltimore City. An example of his work during the COVID-19 pandemic, he led the design and operation of the Baltimore City's isolation and quarantine site, and included novel integrated emergency shelter program for people experiencing homelessness, establishing new pathways to service and housing support. This blend of hands-on clinical practice and program development, both bringing his experience with partners across the city, city agencies, academic institutions, and community-based organizations, has equipped him with the expertise needed to operationalize complex cross-sector plans that advance health equity for people with substance use disorder, people experiencing homelessness, and people with complex medical needs. And that's exactly what this project needs. Just some quick deliverables for this project. The consulting agreement comes with key deliverables that include the development of the project scope and an implementation roadmap for the 24/7 outreach initiative. This roadmap would ensure alignment with the requirements of the consent decree, the needs of the city, while making sure that there is coordination between initiatives like the B Corps initiative, which is another opioid restitution fund earmark, and other city-funded outreach programs to ensure that there's no duplication. The consultant will oversee early implementation of the initiative and create plans for data collection, data sharing, and performance tracking. The goal of this consulting agreement is to have a plan for 24/7 outreach by the end of this year and to roll out the pilot by the end of the fiscal year. Thank you, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Whaley. Questions from the board? I will start. Sorry?
This is Steve.
Go for it.
Which was, this was a great item to make sure that you're reading the agenda very carefully, because my first skim of this confused me greatly. I could not understand why R.E. Harrington was getting into this kind of work.
I had the same.
Yeah, and I had to go back and read. I was like, oh, R.E. Harris. I guess okay, that's somebody different, right? Like that, because we were like, are they providing infrastructure for what you're doing, or okay?
I did the exact same double take, and my staff had to pull me up and inform me they're different people. So we convened a hearing, thank you for attending, this summer, taking a look at the landscape of the behavioral health crisis response capabilities in the city. And one of the things that the hearing made clear was that very few behavioral health-related calls made to the 911 system are being diverted to 988 and our helpline, and that our mobile crisis response teams can take a very, very long time. I believe the average that BHSB had shared was well over an hour, sometimes an hour and a half to 2 hours, to get to the scene. I now see that we're working to create a 24/7 outreach initiative, which I think is really positive. Can you share how this contract will support that effort and sort of just speak to the broader ecosystem of partners in this space?
Yep. So I use the term umbrella of alternative responses, and our 911 diversion program is one of the pieces of that umbrella of services. 911 diversion would divert calls that are behavioral health related away from police or EMS, depending on the nature of the call. So if it's not a medical emergency or not a safety concern, it can be diverted to the mobile crisis teams or to 988, where those calls might be handled over the phone by a behavioral health clinician or a team. The mobile crisis services would be dispatched to help on scene. The role of 24/7 outreach is a little bit more proactive than that, where these teams can be called out when it is not an emergency, or by members of the community if they see an individual that might be in need of services in the community. So if they see somebody, it's midnight, and they see somebody sleeping on a bench outside, and they might want someone to come out and check on that individual. It's not a medical emergency, it's not a safety concern, so EMS or BPD don't need to be there, and it's not necessarily a crisis, so the mobile crisis team doesn't need to be there. It's kind of a proactive check and connection to services. So that's the role that 24/7 outreach would play in kind of this umbrella of services. We have our crisis response teams, our mobile crisis teams, and this is the non-crisis response arm of that umbrella of service.
And Director, if I can just add one point about
Mr. Salisbury.
Thanks, Mr. Council President. Just to add, one of the big components of paragraph 97 is actually around housing, specifically in homeless services. And so a lot of the 24/7 component is really not, I would think of this as separate from the kind of crisis response, but thinking about more the specifically around housing and homeless services. And so that's the specific, the requirement for 24/7 outreach is actually under, in the agreement that we've entered into with the Justice Department, is under housing and homeless services. And so I would think of those, obviously all these things sort of are interconnected, and, people in need of housing support are oftentimes, there will be an overlap with people with behavioral health or crisis, in need of crisis response. But I just wanted to clarify that's a really important pillar of all the work that happens under paragraph 97, under the consent decree.
Understood. I think, Director Whaley, you effectively articulated what the expectation for this contract is. I'm curious about your analysis of the need for this as a contract. Just interested in, like, after this is over, is the expectation that some of this work will be transferred, that a new PIN will be created to support some of this workflow? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, like, why do this through a consulting contract versus, building your shop's own internal capacity?
So we have some of those pins already, and we actually have an active posting right now for a coordinator that would help to shepherd this after the consulting agreement is over. Part of what this consulting agreement would look at is a governance structure. So once we have the project scope, how the project would be governed, so where it would sit, either within our office or an existing city agency, again, coordinating and collaborating with existing programs and with new initiatives that are being funded by the ORF. So I think the justification for doing this as a consulting agreement is that the time for the back end work and putting together a proposal for how we shepherd this on an ongoing basis.
Understood. I'll just note, sort of to this point, to your point, two meetings ago, we approved a position in MORP in your office, or MOOR, M-O-O-R.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of acronyms, that will be responsible for, quote, responsible for fulfilling the mayor's executive order on opioid restitution funds and advancing Baltimore's compliance with paragraph 97, to Mr. Salisbury's point of the consent decree. Just explain to me that position that we created versus this, how they're going to work together, and again, I think, for me, I've said this before, but this is a crowded ecosystem. There are many partners. I think one of the things that hearing really had elevated was the need, and I'm glad that you're here doing it with us, but just the need to declutter some of the space and make it so that someone calls 911 or 988 with a mental or emergency behavioral health crisis, that the right response gets out there and quickly. Share with me kind of that position versus this contract and how they're going to support and work together.
Yeah, so I think to your point of how, when someone calls, how they move through the system effectively, that is the role of the QA/QI position that you all approved last time. So that position is a program manager specifically working on the consent decree work on the quality assurance and quality improvement end. So more of a data component. He's leading an audit of our CAD system. He is reviewing the 911 diversion protocols with our partners at EMS and BPD, looking at kind of the efficiency of our program, analyzing the data to identify gaps. He's leading our Sentinel event reviews, which again bring recommendations of how we can improve the behavioral health system. And so he would work closely with kind of this project in terms of how we meet the consent decree work, what are the recommendations that are coming out of all of those kind of quality assurance, quality improvement mechanisms to make sure that new things that are developed meet the requirements of the consent decree and are aligned with the other components. And so we're building internally as part of this work at BC Moore and with the consent decree team, building out a team with our existing behavioral health project manager, the behavioral health QA project manager, and with this consultant to kind of bring together the work that is happening under the ORF with specific programming related to substance use disorder, but broadening that a little bit more to the behavioral health components and that behavioral health ecosystem to get to the point that we've talked about in the hearing at the previous Board of Estimates meeting around kind of streamlining what is happening, bringing together those partners so that we're creating really effective systems.
Got it. So just, all right, I think you've answered this. I was going to ask about, again, sort of the rationale for doing a contract versus just your own internal staffing in the agency. But look, I think the council is looking forward to continuing to work with you, continuing to work with the health commissioner, Commissioner Taylor. This is an area, again, of particular interest as we continue to reduce violent crime, really thinking about the folks that have traditionally not been well served by our law enforcement approach and have greatly appreciated partnership with Mayor Scott around rethinking public safety through more of a public health lens. I think that every city in America, but particularly those on the West and East Coast, have really struggled with what to do with folks who are chronically homeless, struggling with mental health, struggling with behavioral health, struggling with addiction, and the money that we've been able to gain through the great work of Stephen's boss and their entire team is deeply appreciated, and the impact that it is having. And we look forward to continuing to work with you to make sure we get the right systems in place so that we don't have an over-reliance on just police to solve what I would argue are not police problems, but that we're deploying the right response quickly to address the right problem. So appreciate it. Other questions from the board? Hearing, seeing none. I will provide, this is not noting, I will provide an opportunity for motion on this item.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of approving this item say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. This item is approved. Thank you, Director Whaley. As there is no more business before the board, we will now adjourn this meeting. The next regular meeting of the Board of Estimates will occur on Wednesday, November 5th, 2025 at 9 a.m. I thank everybody for participating and tuning in.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Estimates bid opening for October 15th, 2025. We do have one addenda to share today, and that is for DGS PRJ 001888. This is for the Forest Park Library addition and renovation. The due date was today, but that date for opening due date and date for opening has been changed to November 5th, 2025. Again, that was PRJ 001888. The new opening date is November 5th, 2025. Up first, for the Department of Public Works, we have contract ER 4140R, Environmental Restoration Contract, 4140R, Environmental Site Design Construction. And up first, we have...
Good afternoon. Triangle Contracting, LLC, with a bid bond, $8,683. No, let me go back. $8,683,820.
Okay, I'm going to repeat that number back to you. That number is 8,683,820.00.
Correct.
And do we have an original?
With a bid bond.
Do we have duplicates?
Okay. One original, one dupe.
Okay.
Which way do you do?
No, I have to look at the.
Oh, okay.
And then, was there a flash? They don't get flash drives. Capital never has flash drives. Okay. Okay. And I am going to make a note that the duplicate. That the duplicate did not have a copy of the bid bond. Okay, and that was our only bidder.
Correct.
For this contract?
Yep.
So that was our only bidder for ER 4140R, and that was Triangle Contracting LLC for $8,683,820.00. And Tawanda, I'm going to hand this one back to you for the already read side of the dais. And up next, we have SC 1047, sanitary contract number 1047, pipeline assessment and maintenance citywide. And
The first bid is Spinello Companies with a bid bond.
thank you. Thank you.
Total bid amount is $12,673,300 and no cents.
That number was 12,673,300.00.
Yes.
Thank you. And we have one dupe, one original, and a signed bid bond and a copy of the bid bond.
Correct.
Okay, that bidder was Spinello Companies. And the bid amount was $12,673,300.00. And here's the copy. Thanks, Tawanda. Up next.
Next one is Mobile Dredging and Video Pipe, Inc.
Got it. Thanks, Helen.
Total bid amount is $23,037,494.80.
Okay, let me be sure I got that one right. That was 23,037, 494.80.
Yes, and this has a bid bond.
Thanks. And this is a complete copy. So that bidder was Mobile Dredging and Video Pipe Incorporated for $23,037,494.80. And that was our final of two bidders for SC 1047, Pipeline Assessment and Maintenance Citywide. Up next for Recreation and Parks, we have RP 24822. This is for the Patterson Park wading pool. And up first, we have,
The first bidder is Bensky Construction Company, LLC.
thank you.
That total bid amount is $2,200,000.
That number was 2,200,000.00.
Yes, with a bid bond.
So we have a dupe, an original, and a bond. Okay. That bidder was Bensky Construction Company, LLC, for $2,200,000 and 0 cents.
Correct.
And I think we have one more bidder
The
on this
next
one.
bidder on this contract,
Thank you.
Mid-Atlantic Fountain Design, and Manufacturing Company, Inc. Total bid amount is $1,500,000.
Oh, okay, I'm looking right at it. I was like, what page was that? It's on the very first page. That was 1,500,000,000.00.
And just to note, there's a bid bond in this document, but the bid bond is not signed in the original.
Okay, let me make a note of that. I'm gonna look in this one to see if they accidentally put the signed one here. This is the one that had no. Okay, so we don't have a copy of the bond in this one, and we don't have a signed one.
Right, so note that this bid for Mid-Atlantic Fountain Design and Manufacturing Company, Inc. does not have a signed
Got
bid
it.
bond.
Okay, that is duly noted. And the agencies can review. Thank you. So that was our final bidder, and that was Mid-Atlantic Fountain Design for $1,500,000. And again, we'll be noting on our bid results that we have an unsigned bid bond submitted in the original and no copy in the duplicate. And I think that was our final bidder
Yes, yes, it was.
for Recreation and Parks 24822 Patterson Park Wading Pool.
Yes.
Up next, we have a bid for procurement, RFQ 000750, Lead Hazard Reduction Program. And I think
yes.
I have 3 bidders indicated. Oh, wait, no,
No.
actually, sorry about that.
5.
5. I just don't see all their addresses yet. Thanks.
Okay, the first bid from this is from GEO Environmental Services, LLC. Some written stuff there. Total bid here is 4,844,516, period, 80 cents.
Okay, that number was 4,844, 510? 510.80?
No, 4,844,516 and 80 cents.
My keyboard, sorry. That was 4,844, 516.80.
Yes.
And do we have?
That's in the original and 3 dupes.
3 dupes. And this doesn't involve bonding.
I do not see a bid bond
No bonding.
attached to this. And it-
Okay, that was Geo Environmental
Yes.
Services LLC.
Yes.
$4,844,516.80.
Yes. The next bidder on this contract is PJC Construction. And the total bid on this is 4,914,467 and 90 cents.
Okay, that number was 4,914,467.90.
Yes,
Okay. Do we have copies?
and that's an original and 3 dupes. Okay.
Thank you. Oh, and a flash drive. Do we have a flash drive for the other one? Okay.
No. Your next bidder,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
sorry, just making sure I
No
noted
worries.
that we received flash drives. Got it. Thank you. Hold on just a second. Okay.
This looks like an item bid.
Thank you. Okay. Let me go ahead and I'll read that while you're looking for our next person. It's, again, that was PJC Construction LLC for $4,914,467.90.
Correct. The next bidder on this contract is First Potomac Environmental Company. The total bid on this is, let me read this out now, 15,920,027 and no cents.
That number was 15,920,027.00.
Yes,
Okay. And we have an original,
an original and 3
3 copies.
copies. This is the total down here.
Thank you. And a flash drive.
Okay, then, I'm sorry.
Hold on just a sec. I'm just trying to
Something here, right?
read the total one more time in the copies.
They updated this with the item bid. To anyone about this one being the item bid?
No. I don't remember that saying that.
No, I thought no one called. Is that it? Okay. Oh, okay, 'cause looks like it's.
I cannot read the copies. I'm
Yes,
amazed that you were able to read that, Audrey. I can't read the copies on these. I see, it's like really hard to read. Did they write it in words somewhere?
That's what I was looking for.
Because I'm gonna look at all the copies, because I think that isn't, like, I can't read the second number. I am guessing the same number that you read to me, but I could not
What is going to be close to this?
promise. Because, yeah, I don't know what that, I don't know if that is the correct number. Okay, folks, we are sharing the number as we are able to read it, but I think this is going to need to be looked at carefully because I am not sure it's the correct number because it is very difficult to read all the digits on this bid. Hang on just a sec. I just want to make a note before we move on. Yeah, did you see provided in writing anywhere? Well, it does have a total though. Does anybody know about this bid in particular? for procurement? Yeah, I can't read it. It looks like it has a total. It's not itemized. Okay. Do they provide in writing the number anywhere? Do you happen to, because we've looked through all the pages and we don't see it. Well, I mean, do you require that on the forms? Okay. All right. So we're going to share the total we think we read, but we are not unsure if it is accurate because it is extremely difficult to read. And that number we think is First Potomac Environmental Company for $15,920,027.00. This will be referred to the agency for review because the total is very difficult to read and the total has not been provided in writing, so there is no way to verify that we are reading those digits accurately. Up next.
Okay.
Thanks.
The next bid on this same, this contract is Gold Services, Inc., that's GOEL Services, Inc., and their total is 14,360.00.
Okay, that number was 14,417,360.00.
Yes.
Okay, and we have an original
We have an original and 3 duplicates
and a flash drive.
and a flash drive.
And, okay. Thanks. Okay, that bidder, again, was Goal Services Incorporated for $14,417,360.00. Thank you.
Okay, and the last bidder on this contract is, wait 1 minute, where's that movie?
Take your time.
Modulus LLC. And their total is again, we cannot read this total. Give me 1 moment. Let me see if there is a clearer copy.
Do you want me to look at another copy too? I'll look at a copy also. Oh. I think 4906467. I think I can read that. But wowzer.
Oh, here we are. I
That's
found
tiny.
one. That is 4,906, 467 and 90 cents.
4906467.90. Yep, I think that's what I see too. Okay, that was Modulus LLC, and the bid was $4,906,467.90.
Correct. And that's an original with 3 dupes.
Thank you. And flash drive?
And also, no, that does not, does that, I think it's on
Oh.
the front of that one.
Yeah, there's a flash.
Okay.
Wow. So I don't know, I'm saying this to our colleagues from procurement in the audience, I don't know if they're using a form that we're giving them, but we might want to take all the highlights off of that form. It is literally almost impossible to read some of the numbers, especially when they photocopy the dark color. I don't know if we're doing that or if that's they're choosing to format and color like that, but it's hard to read.
Okay, so that was an original and 3 dupes, and those are all the bids for today.
That was our final bidder for RFQ 750 Lead Hazard Reduction Program. And thanks for your patience as we try to decipher those numbers. And that is our final bid for today. Our next bid opening is on November 5th, 2025 at 12 noon, and we thank you for tuning in. Thanks, Audrey. Thanks, Tawanda.